Let's also make sure to record on this computer as well. Oh, you got all the warnings, guys. You got Hasrad, two Hasrads. Now, Tokide Dibor, would you guys get Malchus? I don't know what the punishment is. Anyway, that was last Masechta, though we might have a tie-in, as you will see. So what I want to do is, before we jump into the Gemara, I'd like to start off with a practical halachic question. This is the shtick I did last time. I will open up with a halachic question related to what we are learning. We will learn today's material, and then at the end, you'll let me know if you have an answer to the question. I'll give you a Zilberstein's answer, and that way I don't leave you on a cliffhanger till next time. So here's the question. The question is as follows. You know, there's this shtick that people do. As we learned, if you are in a walled city from the times of Yoshua ben Nun, all the way from the conquest of Joshua, then they celebrate Purim on the 15th. And standard places, standard cities that weren't walled from that time, and certainly villages, they observe on the 14th. It's like, what if I make sure I'm in Yerushalayim, I'm in a walled city on the 14th, and then on the 15th, I make sure I'm in just, somewhere random, somewhere else in Eretz Yisrael that's not a walled city. So in theory, if somebody really detested listening to the Megillah, or they just, like myself, get too much anxiety trying to hear every word over all the children and the adults who act like children that can't keep their mouth shut. So maybe you don't want to have to go through that anxiety, and that's the shtick you play when you're in Israel to absolve yourself from Purim altogether. So we're not going to explore that question in particular, but what I want to look at is the following. There's a machlokes as to determining what my place is. According to the Mishnah Berurah, Dazman kovehu alos hashachar, where I am at the very beginning of the morning, that determines what I am classified for the day. In other words, if I start off in Shalavim and then I travel to Yerushalayim, my status for the day in terms of my chiyuv of reading Megillah begins on where I woke up. Whereas the Chazon Ish actually says, no, it's based on where you were the night before. So this plays into that shtick. Now the question is as follows. Yesh listapek nosea hates b'matos v'nichnas la'avir Yerushalayim b'rega shel chiyuv hapurim. Let's say I enter Jerusalem airspace just as the chiyuv begins, either from the morning or from nighttime, depending on who you paskin like. But for argument's sake, whatever is the beginning of the Zman, you are in the airspace of Yerushalayim on the 15th. But nachas al karga kama dakos acharetz v'tzachiyuv, and your flight lands, well, you'd probably be landing in Tel Aviv, to be honest, but for argument's sake, your flight lands in Yerushalayim a few minutes after the obligation to read Megillah and Purim sets in. Ha'im nechshav hu lemukaf ben yomo shechai b'kriyas Megillah b'shar mitzvah yom tesav. So now it's the 15th of Adar. Am I considered to be just an ordinary person, an ordinary villager who listens to Megillah on the 14th? Or because I arrived, I'm in Yerushalayim, and I got there on the 15th, albeit I was in the airspace of Yerushalayim, maybe that's enough to consider me part of Yerushalayim, and I'm obligated to hear Megillah on the 15th. In other words, the question is the airspace where one is enough to determine where they are in halacha? What do we consider airspace in halacha? Now, I know, Zay, what you're probably about to weigh in is in terms of military and nations today, the concept of airspace is very integral. Your airspace is considered part of your territory. If an enemy fighter jet enters into your airspace, that's just as bad as going on land as well, presumably. So was that what you were going to say?
No, Moshe, what I had in mind was, if you may be landing in Yerushalayim real early on Sunday morning, on the 15th, but you started off outside of Yerushalayim, and it was the 14th, and you already heard Megillah.
But would it matter, actually?
That's a different question. Is do you have to hear it again? Does the chiyuv start over? Put the airspace thing aside. If you heard it on the 14th, I think your grandfather's question is, Rabbi, do you have to?
Oh, I see.
Are you chayav again on the 15th? Right.
Right. So that's a good question. And because we see the idea is, remember we talked about last time, you had the villages, you had these kfarim that are makdim l'yom haknisa. They could be yotzei as early as the 11th. They don't have to hear it again later on. So you might have to actually, but good. That's a good side question, definitely related. Anyway, keep that question of airspace in mind. Let's do today's Gemara. I don't think you're going to really find the answer per se if you pay attention in the Gemara, but you might. Keep it in the back burner. God willing, we'll answer it at the end of the shir. If I don't get to it, please hold me to it. Here we go. We are on Bays Amid Bays. This is 2b, and we actually are quite a number of lines down. We are by the 2 dots. You can see the first word on the line is dafka, not the first time it says dafka, the dafka under that. I would imagine if you have an art scroll, maybe it's to the second power, potentially the third power, but I think the second power. You should start with krachim hamukafim choma. It's a quote from the Mishnah. Was anyone successful in their art scrolls and locating it that could give the coordinates to anyone else who's using an art scroll?
It's actually on 2B1.
Oh, it's on 2B1. Wow, they got a lot on there. Very good. So, okay, let's go into it. As we learned in the Mishnah, krachim hamukafim choma miyamos Yeshua ben Nun korim b'chamisha asar. That unlike most locations that read on the 14th, walled cities from the times of Yeshua, they read on the 15th. Now, we began to address last time, why do I care about Yemos Yeshua? I would think whatever was a walled city during the times of the Purim story, that's what should matter. Who cares? Like Yeshua ben Nun, we all love Yeshua ben Nun, but my Shemitah Yisrael Sinai, what does Yeshua have to do with this story over here? So not to worry, today's Gemara will address that question. But first, what we want to explore is, where did we come up with this 14-15 day divide? How do we know that walled cities from the days of Yeshua read on the 15th as opposed to the 14th? Here we go. Minahani Mili, where do we get this from? Amar Rava, Damar Kra, Al Kena Yehudim HaPrazim HaYoshvim Ba'arei HaPrazos, Mida Prazim Ba'ar Ba'asar, Mukafim B'chamisha Asar. So it says in the pasuk that those who are in the Prazim, those who are in all of these, the villages, the far-flung places, all the general areas, they read on the 14th. And then it says there's a reading on the 15th. Well, who reads on the 15th? Presumably, the walled cities read on the 15th. That would be the natural inference. If the non-walled cities lay on the 14th, and it says in the pasuk, it talks about reading on the 15th, presumably it leaves space for that. Now, actually, if you look we'll talk about the 15th in a moment, but actually look at the pasuk in your Torah or Hashalim, if you have it, it actually says, Al Kena Yehudim HaPrazim HaYoshim B'arei HaPrazos Osimis Yom Arba Asar L'Chodesh Adar Simcha Mishav Yontom V'Shav Mas Ish Re'ehu. It actually only says the 14th. It doesn't say the 15th, which leads us to ask a bunch of questions. It doesn't say explicitly in the pasuk that walled cities lay on the 15th. The Ema Prazim Bar Basar Amukavin Klal Klalo. Well, I would say let's take the literalist approach. All I see in the pasuk is Prazim, the non-walled cities, laning on the 14th. Since it doesn't talk about a 15th day and walled cities laning on a 15th day, I would say they don't read at all, maybe. Walled cities just never have to read the Megillah. Wow, imagine. Zadie, right? You're a real estate lawyer. Imagine all these real estate prices going up and all the lawsuits, people fighting over, I want to live in a walled city. I don't have to hear Megillah. Or maybe Dafka. Some people say, no, I want to live in a walled, it'll be a whole, people will be fighting. People say, I don't want to live in a walled city. So that way I could hear the Megillah. Well, the Gemara says, this is an untenable conclusion. V'lav Yisrael nenu? Are the people living in walled cities not Jews that they don't have to hear the Megillah? Why? Because I live in a walled city. Does that exempt me from this important fundamental mitzvah being pursuing Misa of glorifying and publicizing a miracle is done for all the Jewish people, right? Men, women, everyone's included in it. Furthermore, it says, Mehodu vad Kush. It says that the kingdom ranged from Hodu until Cush. That includes walled cities as well. So why would walled cities be exempt? That doesn't make sense. Okay, we'll ask another question then. Ve'ema prazim bar besar, mukafim bar besar ubechamesar, kediksiv lios osmis yom arba asar lechodesh adar, des yom chamisha asar bo bechol shana. So maybe, perhaps we could say that prazim, the general areas, will read on the 14th, and the mukafim, the walled ones, they get a double whammy. They have to do it on the 14th and the 15th. Wow. So now, right? So Zaidi, take that into account in terms of real estate prices. Oh, I definitely don't want to live in a walled city now. Now I have to hear laying on the 14th and the 15th. Look at what I signed up for. You know, it's like it's like when you talk with those people who make Aliyah and they like proselytizing you to make Aliyah. So they say like, oh, you come to Israel, you only have to do 1 day of Yom Tov. You don't have to do 2 days of Yom Tov. One person might say, Dafka and Gullus, we get the schus to have 2 days of Yom Tov, wonderful. And then the guy retorts, in Eretz Yisrael, we don't need 2 days of Yom Tov to be holy. So, this flings, they go back and forth. That's what this is reminiscent of to me. If the pasuk was written as follows, on the 14th day and the 15th day, then you would have a point, 14 and 15 for walled cities. But look more closely at the pasuk. Hashna dechsiv es yom arba asar, the es yom chamisha asar, the word es, also es comes the word es, upasik hani barba asar, hani bechamisha asar, and tells us you either lane on the 14th, you either lane on the 15th. So it seems reasonable. Non-walled cities lane on the 14th, walled cities lane on the 15th. What's the problem? That sounds like a great solution. Now the word S, by the way, is very important. Just a quick side note. You're like, oh, why are we making such a big deal out of the word S? Well, as some of you may have heard in perhaps what was the greatest drasha I ever gave at Agudah Shalom until this point, Henry saw my Facebook post. He knows what I'm referring to. And Toby, you were at the 8 o'clock, I know. And maybe, I don't know if Maria, if you were there as well, but those who were at 8 o'clock got to witness it when we had Shabbos Chanukah, Rosh Chodesh, all in one, right? 3 separate Torah, very long. By the way, that week, the Gabbai wanted to do a Hosafa. He wanted to add on an Aliyah. I had to put my foot down on it. I said, like, it would be the greatest travesty ever if we did a Hosafa on a week like that, where it's Shabbos or Chodesh Chanukah. Like, this is not the week we need to shorten things. So what did I do? I got up there and I said, it says in the Gemara, that just as sometimes I got schar for darshaning, for expounding on the Torah, sometimes you get schar, you get reward for refraining, abstaining from expounding. And that was the end of my drasha. That was, the quickest one I've ever given, and apparently the most popular one. Now, that statement of Kishem Shekibati Schar Jisha Kachani Mekabel Schar Prisha is in reference to a larger discussion where they were darshaning every S in the Torah. Every time it said the word S, there was some implication, and then they came to one S which they couldn't figure out what it meant. It just sounded extraneous. And then he said, you know what? Maybe all these drushas don't make sense. Kishem Shekibati Schar Jisha Kachani Mekabel Schar Prisha. I'm willing to renege. That's just a side note, but the word S has a lot of importance. So the fact that it says the word S over here actually, and this is much less far-fetched than some other ideas that we derive from the word S, it says either you land on the 14th, the S Yom Chamisha Asar, or on the 15th. That's a suggestion given. Great. At this point in the Gemara, it sounds wonderful. So 14th for regular cities, 15th for walled cities. But we still got another question that they're going to throw our way. The ema prasim bar besar, mukafin ibo bar besar ibo bechamesar. Well, maybe I'll say, okay, the non-walled cities are on the 14th, and the walled cities, they don't have to do 14th and 15th, but maybe they can choose. Maybe they can choose the 14th or the 15th. Amar Kra, nope, that's not a good question. Why? Because it says in the pasuk, bizmanehem, in their times. Zmano shel zeh, lo zmano shel zeh. This implies that the time for one is not the same time as for the other, meaning 14th for non-walled, 15th for the walled cities. B'ema b'tleisar, no. Okay, I understand that the walled cities cannot have the same day as the non-walled cities, but maybe it's the 13th, not the 15th. So the answer is Kish Shushan. And basically Rashi fills in what's it mean, Kish Shushan. So if you look in Rashi, Kevil Ramazlacha Kasav Zmanamu Kafin Emasu, the Eshkachan Shushan Sha'asu B'Tesvav, Mistara Sha'osa Yom Shir Lemukafin. So we get a little bit of a hint from Shushan. Since we know Shushan is on the 15th, and the pasuk is ambiguous. The pasuk doesn't tell us what other walled cities do. We're left to assume that the same way Shushan, which was a walled city, was on the 15th, so too other walled cities should follow Shushan. That's what it means when it says the 15th in the pasuk. Shushan, I know the 15th. The miracle was they got an extra day to fight on the 14th, so they rested on the 15th. So we're left to assume walled cities will be on the 15th. Hence, we finally conclude once and for all that non-walled cities in general, everything is on the 14th. And now we know walled cities are on the 15th. But this harkens back to something that our friend Erwin mentioned last time. So when he views the recording, he'll hear the shout out. So what Erwin pointed out was, wait, there's a number of other mitzvot.
He's on. He's on. He's
Oh,
on.
he is? Oh,
Yep.
Where is he?
Telephone. Down at the bottom.
Yes, I am here.
Oh, all right. So, you're on a different number this time. Okay, my
Of
mistake.
course you are.
You're good. You know people's numbers by heart. Wow. So what Erwin, what you pointed out last time is, wait, but there's different mitzvos on Purim, right? I think this was your ha'ara. In addition to Megillah reading, we have Matanas Levyonim, we have the Suda of Purim, the meal, and we have Mishloach Manos. So, Mikra Megillah is only 1 out of 4 of the major mitzvos that we have on Purim. So Eshkachan Asiya, I know when to do the active mitzvos like eating, Matanas Levyonim, giving gifts to the poor, giving the Mishloach Manos, gifts to our friends and neighbors. But Zechira Minalan, where do I know that Zechira also has this divide of 14th and 15th? What's Zechira? Zechira is remembering. How do we remember the miracle? The Megillah is how we remember the miracle. So it says in the pasuk that L'kaim alim lios osim es yom arba chodesh adar beis yom chamisha sarba b'chol shana. It only uses the word osim, to act, to do. How do I know that Zechira is also has this 14-15 divide, and the distinction is between walled cities versus non-walled cities? So the answer is Amar Kra. We introduce another pasuk that says, "Vayamim ha'ela niskarim v'nasim," and these on these days it will be remembered and it will be done. Very clear. Iskish zechir la'asiyah. We have a hekish by the fact that remembrance and action are juxtaposed to each other, right next to each other. They're in the same pasuk. We see that they share similar halachos, and therefore we know that not only Matanas Levyonim, not only Mishloach Manos, not only the Sudas Purim is done with this 14-15 divide, depending on where you are, but also the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah follows the same pattern, the same formula. And that brings us to the end of the first section of Gemara that we learned tonight. So let me pause for just a moment. Do we have any clarification questions?
Yeah, I would like to suggest that you can't have action unless you first remember. So they're intertwined.
That is fair. That is fair. And that would presumably be why we do have the mitzvah Mikra Megillah and not just the other aspects of the Chag. I shouldn't call it a chag. It's not a chag technically. Whatever you want to call it. Okay, very good. Any other ha'aros? Any other questions? All right. Now this is going to get to a question that bothered me when I was going through Mishnayos Megillah, and finally when I got to the Gemara, I said, Baruch Hashem. Of course, the Gemara addresses it, which is something that probably bothered you. Why are walled cities determined based on the days of Joshua, the days of Yoshua? Yeshua is a great guy, but what does Yeshua have to do with the Purim story? So here we go. Masnizan delo ki haitana. In fact, because of this very question, our Mishnah follows the opinion of one Tana, but there's an opposing Tana that says otherwise. The Tanya, Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Omer, Krachen Amukapin Chomen Yemosach Hashverosh, Korim Bechamisha Asar. That walled cities from the times of not Yeshua ben Nun, but the times of Achashverosh, they are the ones that read on the 15th. My time of Reisha ben Karcha. What's the rationale behind Reisha ben Karcha? Pretty simple. Ki Shushan, just like Shushan, Ma Shushan Mukaves Cholami Mosach Hasher Shekom Chamisha Asar, just as Shushan, that's where everything went down. They read on there. That was a walled city during the times of Achashverosh, right? That was the capital city, and they read on the 15th. It seems only logical that other walled cities from the same time that the Purim story actually happened, they share the same status as the walled city of Shushan. Pretty compelling, right? I think that fits much more nicely, right? The Tana Dida my Taima, which of course leads the Gemara to ask us, well, if so, that you're making such a great case, what was the rationale of the Tana of our Mishnah who determined that Yehoshua ben Nun was the cutoff point? Just to remember to mute ourselves, Apostle, in case we're still unmuted. So what's his reasoning? I'll just pause. Let me just get where I'll get where it's coming from, and done. Okay. So what's his reasoning? Einochinami. He would probably have agreed. I would have thought to assess it based on Shushan, but Yalev prazi. But I have a Gezer Shava that tells me otherwise. Ksiv Hacha. It says here in the Megillah, Al Kain HaYehudim HaPrazim. Note the word prazim. Uksiv Hasam Levad Me'are HaPrazi Harbe Ma'od. It says in the Torah also use the word prazi. Mal ala mukaves toma mimosi shobenon. Just as in the Torah, it was referring to cities from the times of Yeshua ben Nun. Afka mukaves chomi moses shoben Nun. So too in the Purim, in terms of the Hilchos Purim, when we want to assess when to read from the Megillah, we also base it on Yeshua ben Nun. So right, I would have thought to assess things based on when the Purim story happened, but what can you do? I have a Masorah, I have a tradition, a Gezer Shava that makes a connection between the Prazim here in our story to the cities in the times of Yeshua ben Nun. Yeah, Toby, you sound like you're not satisfied by that.
No, I mean, the whole thing doesn't even make sense to me because the time of Yehoshua was way before time of Achashverosh. Mm-hmm. So if you're talking about cities that were walled at the time of Yehoshua, maybe you would say then it means only the cities that were walled at the time of Yehoshua, and then it wouldn't even include, because Persia didn't even really exist at that point, I don't think. So you'd have all these places that exist later but didn't exist then.
And you want to know what the biggest question is, Toby? And I think this might be what you're getting to, which is what the Gemara is going to get to, which is maybe Shushan wasn't the walled city from the times of Yeshua ben Nun.
Maybe there wasn't even Shushan.
Exactly.
Maybe
and even if there was Shushan, who said it was a walled city? Maybe Shushan shouldn't be reading on the 15th. Very good. So you remember what the Gemara is going to say. Now we're going to pick apart. Why didn't each Tana come to the conclusion of his opponent, of his adversary here? So Rabbi Shimon Karcha, who said we determine it based on the days of Achashverosh, he simply didn't have the tradition to make a Gezerah Shava to derive the standards from Yeshua, from the times Yeshua ben Nun. Okay. Elatana Didan, but the Tana of our Mishnah, who does based on the times Yeshua ben Nun, why doesn't he base it on the times of Achashverosh? The Gemara interjects, my timer. So it's like Prazi. What do you mean? What's his rationale? We just told you the rationale. He has a Gezerah Shava. He has a drasha that tells him otherwise. No, Haki Kamar, this is actually the question. Ela Shushan Davdinan Kiman, Loki Prazin, Veloki Mukafin. Toby, this is the question. But what do I do with something like Shushan, which wasn't we don't know whether it was a walled city from times of Yeshua, yet we assume that Shushan reads on the 15th. How can we reconcile that? Amarava Vamila Kedai, Shani Shoshan, Shushan, Hoel Vanasa Bunnies. The answer is Shushan is a category unto itself, unlike all the miscellaneous generic walled cities. Since Shushan is where the nace took place. What do you mean the nace took place? Shushan got an extra day to, right? They got the bonus round. You know, like when you're playing pinball or you're playing some sort of game, you do so well, they give you a bonus round. So that's what happened with Shushan. They got a bonus round, and therefore they celebrate afterwards on the 15th. But every other walled city is based on Yehoshua, Shushan being the exception to the rule. Okay. Makes sense. I can get behind that.
I remember, Moshe,
Yeah.
I remember somebody saying that Shushan Habirah was a walled city, and the rest of it was not walled. It was outside the wall. And I don't remember where he got that from, but why have the name Shushan Habirah? And then you have just to be a reason for it. And it would seem to me that if you have a capital city back in that vast time frame where they had walled cities, a king is not going to have his capital outside of a walled city. It's not defensible.
Of course, yeah. And I've watched
So it had to be
movie.
a walled city where the miracle took place.
Absolutely. So yeah, you'll see that. You know, you watch like medieval fantasy films like I do, you'll see that there will be the palace or fortress. There'll be the hold, where that's where they hunker down during the siege or during the fight. But then, like, there's the general city, there's the suburbs of the city, and we'll actually talk about in a moment how the suburbs of the city, depending on where they're located, could be subsumed along with the city that they are suburbs of. So we'll get there momentarily. Just continuing in the
I remember learning. I think it was about Jerusalem, and it probably it's the case of other walled cities. You have a walled city, and that population grows, and people build homes outside the wall, and then they build a new wall. So you have a wall within a wall, and you might have a third ring of wall as the city expands. And
it's even a question if you're
like that, it's going to take a long time to fight a war in it.
Right, but even if they don't rebuild the wall, I think that's what we're going to see is that if you're close enough, it's still part of the wall. It's still considered part of the walled city.
Okay, great. So we're going to get.
I'm saying if you got rings of wall, it's all a walled city.
Okay, great. So you know what? We're going to get to the definition of what's considered part of the city toward the end. So let's just finish a shock of Atari over here, and then we'll address that point hopefully in a little bit more detail. So we're still middle of shock of Ataria. We're still playing ping pong over here. Bishlama, and I have to get myself back in the train of thought. Bishlama Tanadidan. Our Tana makes sense. Okay. So now we're going to bring in a pasuk, which presumably is the basis for distinguishing between the days of Yeshua versus Achashverosh, distinguishing between walled cities versus Shushan versus other walled cities. Let's see. Bishlam Tanadidan Haydichsiv Medina, Medina, Ve'ir, Ve'ir. At the time of our Mishnah, who bases things on the times Yeshua ben Nun, he can use this pasuk very nicely. Medina, Medina. The reason it says Medina and Medina twice, Medina being like a province, a country. What's the official art school translation for Medina? Province. What do they call it?
Yeah, province.
Okay, great. So Medina, lechalik b'mukafin chomos Yeshua ben Nun, l'mekaves choma miyamos achashverosh. So according to our Tana, the reason it says Medina, Medina, right? So it distinguishes between walled cities sometimes Yeshua versus Achashverosh. Walls from Yeshua count, walls from Achashverosh don't. Ir ve'ir, city versus city, to distinguish between what kind of cities. Ir ve'ir nami l'chalik bein Shushan l'shar ayaros. Ir ve'ir is distinguish the city of Shushan from other cities. Unlike other cities that are not walled, they don't read on the 15th. Shushan is the exception to the rule. So the Tana of our Mishnah can use this very nicely. Ela Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha Bisham Medina Medina lechalek. Okay, so now the Girsa in our Gemara is, I assume you have a similar text in your Gemara. The next words are Bein Shushan l'shar ayaros. Is that what you have in your Gemara? Heaven forfend, I would tell you to cross it out, but if you look at Rashi, he sort of does that for us. The way you have to read it is as follows. I'll read to you based on Rashi. El Rabbi Shua ben Karcha, Bishla Medina Medina, Lechalek Bemu Kafin Choma Miyamos Achash Verosh, Lishaemu Kafin Miyamos Achash Verosh. So Rabbi Shua ben Karcha can use the words Medina Medina versus Medina to distinguish between walled cities from the times of Achashverosh versus cities that were not walled during the times of Achashverosh. Ela ir ve'ir l'mayasa. But when it comes to city versus city, what kind of cities does he need to distinguish between? He does not need to distinguish between Shushan and other cities because Shushan is a city that's walled from the times of Achashverosh. It's the quintessential walled city of the times of Achashverosh. So what's he going to do with the words ir ve'ir? What kind of distinction does he need to make otherwise? So Amalek Reishim ben Karcha, because Reishim ben Karcha does not know what to do with this pasuk, what would he tell you? Well, it's like two wrongs make a right. Well, my opponent here, he doesn't fit nicely with this pasuk either. Came to Islay Prazi Medina Lali. Well, not that he doesn't fit per se, but he already has the drasha of Prazi. Anyone remember what did Prazi tell us? We just learned it earlier. Prazi distinguished for us that, back in the Gemara earlier, right? We said, that it's
the time of Yoshua, because that was when it was mentioned.
Very good. Prazi was our Gezer Shavah to Yoshua. So that we know that we base things sometimes Yoshua. So wait, why do I need Medina to tell me there are cities walled during Yoshua on the 15th? Cities not walled in Yoshua are not during the 15th. No, I already have the Gezer Shavah. So he's not making use of this pasuk either. What does he need Medina for? So apparently two wrongs actually do make a right. You heard it here first. So Ella Karla Drashu, rather, this pasuk has nothing to do with our discussion. It's used for a separate point. Well, not a completely separate point, but the Drasha Hu Da'asa. With Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Hu Da'asa, Damar Yeshua ben Levi, and this gets to the point Zadie and Hammer you're bringing up. Krach b'chol samechlo b'chol nirimo ni don't get krach. A city and anything that is close to it, its suburbs that are near it or can be seen with it, they have the same status as the city that they surround. That's what this comes to teach us. Now, where do we get that from the pasuk? You look in Rashi. Rashi fills it in for us. Second to last line. El Haki Kamar. Kol ir v'ir hasamach medina shetei kamosa. Every city and city that is near its Medina has the same status as it. That's where he gets it from. Now, how close do you need to be to a city in order to be considered part of the city? Ad kama, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah v'yitim Rabbi Chia bar Abba, kimei Chamson Tveria mill, like the distance from Chamson to Tveria, which is a mill. I'll explain what a mill is in a moment. It's a measurement. Ulema mil, new, just tell me the measurement. Tell me 60 miles. You don't have to tell me between New York to, I don't know what 60 miles from New York, but give another city. Just tell me the mileage. That's all I need to know. How far is a mil? The distance from Chamson to Tveria. We don't know how long a mil is. That's why I told us the distance from Chamson to Tveria. Generally, we assume a mil, I believe, is about 18 minutes it takes to walk. And knowing a mil is very important for different areas of halacha. For instance, there is an obligation for a man to daven with a minyan. There's a minority opinion that says it's a nice thing to do, but Ramosha Feinstein and others make it, and the majority opinion is very clear. There's a chiyuv midrabanan for every man to daven tefillah b'tzibur with a minyan when they are available. Now, available, people like to stretch what available means. If you are working, then yes, you can daven b'yechidus on your own. But if you are in the area and you just need to shift your schedule around a little bit to make minyan work, that's what you got to do. I'll save that for a drush, I guess. Now, a mil is important because if you are traveling and you can get to a shul to daven with a minyan and it's a mil away from you, you have to travel a mil out of your way to get to a minyan. And if it's on your way, you have to travel 4 mil in order to get to that minyan. So approximately 18 minutes or so. It'd be interesting to see. I have to see if Halach Lamaisa post can actually say, yeah, if there's a minyan 20-minute drive away from you, you don't have to go to it. I don't know if I've seen anyone who says that, but I haven't fully plumbed the depths of the sugya either. But a mil is a very important measurement to know. Keep that in mind. Okay. Let me pause because we have one last small little section. And the only thing that has to do with what we just learned is that it has the same rabbi, Rabbi Yirmiyah, who we just learned from, / Rabbi Chia. He had another idea that's nothing to do with our sugya, but as the Gemara does, it will often cite miscellaneous teachings from a rabbi that it wants us to know once he already enters into the discussion. So, any other questions or ha'aros?
I just found a footnote in the Gemara, and it says a mil is 2,000 amos, which is between 1,028 and 1,269 yards.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. My Gemara doesn't come equipped with those footnotes, so shkoach. That's good to have. All right, but practically speaking, it might be measured also in terms of the minutes it takes for one to get there. So, okay. Finally, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah v'Tei Rabbi Chia. Again, nothing to do with what we just learned, except the same rabbi taught this idea. By the way, I just want to let you guys know that Hazorim B'dima Barina Yiksoro, right? You sow in tears and then you will rejoice at the harvest. Not to say that, God forbid, that this was Hazorim B'dima, but letting you know that next Amud is going to be full, is going to start off some of our Agadata that we're going to be learning here. And trust me, there's a lot of Agadata in store for us in Megillah. So for those who like Agadata, we're going to have a nice amount of it. So here we go. What is minatzfach? Minatzfach is, those are the letters mem, nun, tsari, pei, chaf that have what we called them when I grew up in yeshiva was you had an endamem, an endachaf. I don't know, what do they call them in the modern Orthodox plate? A mem sofit.
Chaf sofit or
yeah, so that was like something new that I learned. We called it an endachaf, an endamem. I guess that was a Yiddishism. So I have to translate things into modern Orthodox.
Yeah, I first heard that when the girls started going to yeshiva.
Oh, is that
I'd
the
never heard
girls
it
say that also? Where they
Yeah.
go? Where they go?
Tag.
Oh, it's funny because certain things, certain yeshivisms will make it into the girls' school, some won't. So, they'll say like things like mamish and some of the basic words. They don't say you have to be orangutan and Lernen. You don't hear that coming from the girls' schools. So it's I don't know what carries over, what doesn't. It's also like I noticed that in Darche growing up, we were taught to pronounce things with a cholam. But for some reason in the sister schools like Tag, Beis Yaakov, I'm pretty sure they all came out saying things with a cholam. So my theory is that it wasn't ideological per se. It's just that cholam is sounds more lighter and better for a feminine touch than cholam, which gives just gives me the image of some like greasy guy eating a bowl of challah and staining his white shirt on it. That's just my imagery. Sorry
could have been
to
just who was-
bias you. What was that?
It could have been just who was teaching the class.
Could have it could have been that. It could have been that, possibly. All right, we'll do a study one day. Anyway, why do we bring this up? So all of the endo letters here, these are tsofim amrim. What are tsofim? So these are the seers. These are the neviim, right? Sofa is to see something. Interestingly, we call them tsofim here. Tsofim amrim. These were established by the prophets. So seemingly, until this point, what was that? Yeah, exactly. It doesn't mean just to see, like to be roa, but sofa is like a seer. They could see, they could get visions. So these were instituted by the Nevi'im. There were no sophites, no endo letters at all that we had to deal with, but rather they established it. The Tisbara, can they do that? What is this, Reform Judaism? What do you mean? It says in the Torah, these are the mitzvahs that I give you, meaning no prophet that comes after Moshe Rabbeinu has a right to add on to the Torah. Furthermore, Rav Chisda taught us that since on the luchos, the letters were etched in 3D, the mem and the samach, which are completely round, they had a little donut floating in the middle so that the letter would appear as a mem or a samach. Do you guys want me to show you a picture, or do you have it in your art scrolls? Okay, if it doesn't appear in your art scroll, I'll show it to you in my Mesifta. Mesifta gives it to me. So here you go. So you see in the mem and the samach, the donut in the middle, the donut hole, right? You get like the little pop-ums from Entenmann's. You get like the little pop-um in the middle that's floating in the luchos to give you the shape of a mem or a samach. So the fact that Rav Chisda tells us that these existed on the luchos, which predates the Nevi'im, means that we had an endemem, we had a samach all the way from the times of the Torah. So what do you even mean? Even if the Nevi'im were allowed to create new letters, clearly the endemem already existed before the Nevi'im came along. So here's the answer. In Mahavahavu, yes, these letters did exist. But they weren't sure which of the letters we know nowadays is obvious to us. We learned, those who went to Yeshiva Day School, we learned it in kindergarten, pre-1A, but they didn't know back then that the end of mem goes in at the end of the word, that you can't start off a word like the word mitzvah with it. And the Nevi'im came along and they straightened things out for us. They told us which ones go at the beginning and middle of the word, and which iteration of the letters go at the end of a word.
So until the time of the Nevi'im, they didn't know Yiddish.
They didn't know Yiddish? What do you mean? It's a mama Lashon. But still, nonetheless, if they didn't know that, who are we to come along, the Nevi'im, later and make a hachra, to make a decision on this? Ella shichachum b'chazav yastam. Rather, what happened? One point we did know where the letters went in the word. We forgot somehow. Don't ask me how. And then came along the Nevi'im, and they reestablished. They figured it out. They did their research. They got a vision, and they figured it out. They told us where the letters belong. There is a lot of literature on this, by the way. I unfortunately did not plumb the depths, talking about, well, how can it be forgotten? Like, what is that implications for the Sifrei Torah that were written beforehand? You tell me, like, the ancient Sifrei Torah that were written during those times before they figured it out, they would have all the letters discombobulated until they figured it out? It's a good question. It's a good question. There's what to discuss about that. But with our limited time left, well, you just excuse me, tissue. With our limited time left, I would like to do as follows. 1, I would like to answer our question from the beginning of this year. 2, I would then like to proceed to take any concluding questions or ha'aros before we complete. And as my commitment always goes, we try to finish in under an hour, so God help us. Okay. Remember, our question was as follows. I enter Yerushalayim airspace, right? We just spent the whole year talking about walled cities, pretty much. I enter Yerushalayim airspace, but I only land in Yerushalayim a few minutes after the Chalos Zman Megillah begins. After the time of Megillah, the obligation effectuates. So is floating in Yerushalayim airspace enough to be considered part of the city in terms of, for halachic purposes, in terms of being chayiv in Megillah? So here we go. What I want to do is I want to now bridge our previous limud of Maseches Makos to our limud of Maseches Megillah. And when I saw this piece in Chashukei Chemed, I said, beautiful. This is our bridge. This is our bridge between the Masechtos. And it shows us, it's just another beautiful example of where all of Torah is interconnected. I'll read for you as follows. Od Yeshel Havi Raya Mehad Bevor B'Makos. It says in Makos, remember all the way back in Yud Beis, Amud Beis on 12b. This is some people's favorite sugya. Shemnitza Harotzeach Benof Eitz Shebetok Tchum Ir Miklat. Remember when the guy escaping to near Miklat, he then sits on a tree and the branch is outside and stump is in. Remember that one? I don't want to bring back anyone's trauma here. Sorry. I should have trigger warning before this. But if one is on a tree that is within the boundary, within the general boundary of the Ir Miklat, koltoso, even though I'm only on the tree, it protects me. Even if the actual gufa eitz, the primary trunk of the tree, is outside the Ir Miklat, it seems we can learn from here that the airspace of the Ir Miklat protects you just like the ground of the Ir Miklat. And therefore, we can extrapolate from this Gemara Makos that just like when I'm in the airspace of the Ir Miklat, I'm considered to be within the Ir Miklat. So too, when I'm within the airspace of a walled city of Yerushalayim, that means I am mamish in Yerushalayim for all halachic intent and purposes. What do you make of that? You got a good question. It's not analogous, right, Toby?
I'm sorry. I didn't hear what you said.
Analogous?
No, I think it is, but I think I think it kind of goes back to what we were just learning here. I would think that the concept of mill makes a difference. In other words, how far
measure a mill upwards.
Well, or outwards. In other words, if you were like, how far does the airspace expand? So if maybe mill is the answer, that if you were within a mill of mamish the landing, and you were in the air from that point on, maybe that would bring you in.
Maybe. I like the application. He doesn't seem to mention that idea, but I think that is a fantastic suggestion. I didn't make the connection between the mill and this question, so you know what? It actually was connected to today's Gemara. You made the connection. Shkoch. Zaidi, what were you going to say? Just pause. Oh, okay. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, yeah.
Okay, my internet is getting a little fuzzy here. So you know what? I'm gonna wrap up because I don't know how long my luck will hold out before it happens again. You'll forgive me if I cut the question part short. Sadie, feel free to call me after the share, and I'm happy to pick it up. One last point that he makes. First of all, it's not analogous. A tree within a city versus actual airspace. They might not be completely analogous. So there is a little bit of Efsher Lidchos here. But then he brought the question to Meir V'chasni Shlita. Who's that? Rav Eliashiv. Rav Eliashiv was Rav Zilberstein's father-in-law. So aside from Rav Zilberstein being a huge scholar, his father-in-law was one of the Gedolei Hador. And so Amar Shnir Lo She'einu Ben Krach, Rav Eliashiv actually said, no, you have to be mamish within the city. Airspace doesn't count. Why? Because it says in the pasuk that we learned, Al Kenai Yehudim HaPrazim Hayoshvim B'Harei HaPrazos. Those who are dwelling, who are not literally sitting, but sitting, who are dwelling in the Ari Prazos. Harei Shab'inon Yeshiva, but you need to be mamish dwelling. You have to be sitting in the city. Airspace is excluded. So that was a novel detail that Rav Eliashiv, with his keen insights, picked up as he was reading through the Megillah to answer this question. So, Rabosai, if you have this question on Halach L'Maisa, you can let me know. But I imagine for most of us, well, you're not flying into Yerushalayim. You're usually flying into Tel Aviv anyway. So this is usually not Halach L'Maisa. If you ever find yourself on a helicopter and you get into Yerushalayim just as the Chiyuv begins, consult your local Orthodox rabbi, and we'll figure things out for you. Okay.
And also, don't go to Beit Shemesh because there's a shiloh on which day, and you have to hear it twice. Whether there was a wall in Beit Shemesh.
Then you get everything twice, right? Then you get to do the Suda twice. You get to do Shalach Manas twice.
I see.
Good
Toby
stuff.
says, look at the opportunity I have.
Yeah.
But then you have to listen to the rabbi.
Don't make Morris out of it. It's another day off. It's
Okay.
great.
All right, there you go.
Very good. Okay, so look, Henry, Toby, we have different views, and how about that? Because internet is still working, Zadie, I know I pushed you off for a moment. What was your point? What was your question, or Ha'ara?
Okay. But if you were outside the city on the 14th and you fulfilled all the mitzvot on the 14th, why do you have to hear the Megillah again when you wind up in a walled city on the 15th?
Right. You're saying is because similar to how the village dwellers, they heard on the 11th, they don't have to hear it again at a later date. If I was Yotzi already, I shouldn't have to do it again when I go to another city. So, right, that's a good point. I guess the bigger question.
Rabbi Stretch a second time.
But you do.
Right.
See, I don't read this as you have to do it on the 15th if you've already done it somewhere else. It's just that you may do it on the 15th if you haven't done it somewhere else.
Well, I think you would be bound. You'd have to, because today you wake up and you woke up in a place that is obligated in Megillah. So it becomes a din in the makom almost, a din in the place where you are.
But is it? Is it a din? Is it on the place or is it on the person?
I think on the makom, but you know what? Let me look and see if there's some divergence. Let's see if there's some divergence.
I think it is. You'd have to hear it again. I think.
I think that is what we paskin, but I want to see if there's some. I wouldn't be surprised, Toby, if your point is advanced, because it seems like a very reasonable svara. Is on the gaver, is on the makom. Maybe we'll do this as a Monday night shir, God willing, closer.
I mean, it's kind of like when people, between Israelis and here with the 8th day of Yontiv. Do they have to keep it? Do they not have to keep it?
It's a whole can of worms right there. It's a whole
right, but to me, this sounds like a similar question.
Maybe, yeah. It might have definitely. There's what to connect over there. Okay, you're giving us what to think about.
I have a whole can of worms. I'm going fishing.
No, we should do that again. It's been a while. All right, it's 7:58. We're ending the shir here. Everyone have a wonderful Shabbos, and God willing, looking forward to picking it up next week. Be'ezus Hashem. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Shabbos.